You're listening to the Wanderlusting Wives podcast, your podcast for escaping life's monotony, indulging in your wildest travel fantasies, and discovering the constant beauty of this ever-changing world.
On today's episode, Jamie Bowman, attorney, international legal consultant, and author of Bike Riding in Kabul, joins us to share her incredible, unique stories from her work around the globe.
Welcome to the Wanderlusting Wives podcast. We are your navigators, Allison
and Regan. And welcome to another Travel Tuesday, listeners. Thanks for traveling along with us. And we've got a really great journey, inspirational journey, honestly, waiting for you today with our guest that's going to be sharing with us. But before we introduce her, just of course, another quick plug for our website, www.wanderlustingwives.com, and there you can find, as always, all easy links to our episodes, more information about us. And if you are interested in being a guest on a Travel Tuesday episode, we would love to hear your stories. We are big believers that you can travel in your backyard or you can travel across the world, but stories come from travel and just life experiences, honestly. And I think we're going to find that today. So I'm really looking forward to our episode, as I said. But Allie, before we get to that, anything from you?
Yeah, the same old over here. Just encouraging all of you to follow us on social media. Our Instagram is at Wanderlusting Wives. Facebook is Wanderlusting Wives Podcast. Twitter at Wanderlust Wives. And we also have an email where you can connect with us, give us your feedback, or if you want to be a guest, you can also email us. There's a form on our website to fill out, but you're more than welcome to email us as well. We'll always check our emails. And you know what to do at this point. Give us a 5-star review if you're loving our podcast and share it with a friend. It's the best gift you can ever give someone. And it's free, so that's even better. But enough about us. I'm so excited to introduce our guest. We have Jamie Bowman with us today. She is the author of Bike Riding Kabul, The Global Adventures of a Foreign Aid Practitioner. So welcome, Jamie.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure to be you.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you. I know, at least for me, I read some of your excerpts from your book, and I'm ecstatic to have the opportunity to talk to you and get to know more about your experiences. Where can our guests find your book?
Oh, it's available through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and one bookstore in Washington, D.C. It's the Bridge Street Book, but it's done really well. I'm really pleased, but I want to clarify something first. I'm a bit of a fraud being on a travel podcast because I didn't originally write a travel book. I was really surprised how that other people thought I did. What happened is that I wrote it, I liked it, it's just exactly the book I wanted to write, which was really pleasant, development. So I applied to all those book award contests, and I really thought I had a good shot for the Novelist Award, which is about improving the world. And I applied for the cross-cultural category, and I really was so excited because I thought I had a good shot. Just to take a step back, the book itself is about my work as a lawyer overseas, and it covers 10 years of my 20 years. And the chapters are on Kosovo, Bangladesh, Ukraine, Russia, Afghanistan, Southern Sudan, Rwanda, and then I went back to Afghanistan again. So there is a lot of travel, but I meant to focus on the work and why the United States are in these countries and why I go on behalf of the United States. So it had a different focus. So I applied to this Nautilus Award, and I waited and waited and waited. And then they made the announcements and I didn't win. And I was like, wow, I had a sense that I was, in the running. So I made the unusual move to send them an email. And I said, so if I didn't hear from you, does that mean I didn't win? Which is really kind of ridiculous when you think about it. But I still can't believe that I did that. So I got an email back that said, normally, yes, but in your case, your book was moved out of cross-cultural and into travel because we think your book is more of a travel book. It talks about all these countries. I'm like, okay, I'll take the win. And so now I promote myself as a travel book, but it is I feel a little fraudulent at times.
That's okay. I mean, honestly, we love on our podcast to kind of take travel from different angles. Because it's not always for vacation. It's not always pleasure. Like sometimes even when I'm booking a flight or something, it asks me, is it work? Is it pleasure? Like what is it? And I think this is a really interesting angle that we haven't had yet. And it comes from based in like a very pressing and needed area of work that you were clearly very passionate about that then took you into those travels. And I'm just really excited to dive into kind of like what are the origins of that work? How did you get into it and what drives you in it?
Well, I was lucky in the sense that lucky, unlucky. Every door open. What is it? Every door that closed, oh, the windows opens. That was my case. I was working in the subprime industry, and I didn't like it. I didn't like the way it was moving. I didn't like the loans we were making. It just wasn't something that I felt good about. So almost at that same time, you remember that in 1991, the Soviet Union imploded, and all of those Soviet states declared independence, and they all wanted to be democracies and they wanted free market economy. So that meant all those communist based countries, and we're talking Armenia, Ukraine, Belarus, well, maybe not Belarus, but all, Mongolia, all those countries that had been previously so associated with the USSR were now looking to change their laws and change their policies. So at that same time, they were looking for someone to do mortgage, which is exactly what I did in the subprime industry. And I was hired to go to different countries to help them draft the credit laws, the laws that would enable you to buy a house, the laws would enable you to borrow money in order to open a business, things like that. And it's very routine for us. I mean, we have complaints about our system for getting credit. It's never enough. It's never on the best terms. But in those countries, it was non existent. So I would go to places like Kosovo was one of my first big projects, and they originally had sort of a soft communism. They were able to get some credit. There were businesses open. It wasn't as strict as it was in other places like Armenia. Okay, so because of that, I found myself working in ministries and parliaments in these countries that were looking to reform, and they were all over the board. I mean, it was insane. I mean, there was places like Bangladesh that just was behind the global matrix as far as laws goes. Now, this sounds really boring, I know, but you know what? Somehow this book turned out to be fairly entertaining. There's a love interest. There's a lot of discussion of the locals I dealt with. There's a lot of discussion about why we as Americans are in those countries and whether we're doing a good job or a bad job. It's pretty topical right now. But I started the start of the book is in 2002, so it's been 20 years that I've been part of this scene.
Wow. So you say that sounds boring, and I'm just like hanging on your every word. Like, this is fascinating.
It's funny though, when you're in this business and you go home and you start talking to your friends and your family about it, they immediately glaze over. It's like people can't get their head wrapped around that you would actually get on a plane and go to another country where you don't speak the language and help them draft a law that will help them, prosper. It is kind of odd. I agree.
Hmm.
But in between all that, when you're flying in and you're flying out, if you structure it correctly, you can go on side trips that you would never take before. For example, I was in Bangladesh and I was only there for, I guess, about 3 or 4 months, and I was able to go to India because I was so close. I mean, it was unlikely that I would have gone to India if I hadn't been in Bangladesh.
Yeah.
So it did turn out pretty interesting.
Yeah. Absolutely. Like, if you're over there anyways, might as well.
Exactly. It's such a long trip home, and you figure you take advantage. That's one of the perks of being in this job. And interestingly, I do a lot of presentations to the young students who are going with international development now, and international relations is kind of the sister area. And a lot of people really want to do it just to travel. It seemed as a way to do that.
Hmm.
Um, I was a little more, I was a little more focused on the work, but yeah, travel is a thing now.
It doesn't really matter how you get to the places of like, is it, again, like we were saying, is it work? Is it because you chose that destination? But then it's those people that you interact with. It's those stories that come out of it that you didn't expect. So what were some of those for you that came out of it? The stories, or the your favorite interactions with other people, navigating the language barriers. Like, what about stories that came from that aspect?
One thing I will say, I enjoy the Americans who travel. Whenever I was overseas, and you'd know that somebody was an American by their big American flag on their backpack. It's not like I was drawn to them, but it is kind of fun to sit in an airport and talk to another American who travels. It's kind of gives you a little. It helps you not be so homesick, and Americans are, I think, overall, and I at least when I started this, I'm going to be careful here. Um, they're more outgoing. They're out to the Americans who travel are out there to have fun and to experience and to learn and to try things out. And it's always a pleasure to run into them. So that was part of my. A lot of time I get asked, "What things did you bring home?" And basically I was on the road 12 months of the year. I would come home for 1 month each year, and so I had to be very careful about what I bought, because everything is what weighs. It's like you pick up a
Mm,
pot and you think, oh, this would be so nice in my apartment, and then it'd be too heavy, or you didn't want to carry it, or it would going to break. So what I did do is I started to buy jewelry from the places I went. And so I have like a lapis lazuli pen that I got in Afghanistan. I have a bangle from Bangladesh, and so those were lightweight, and I'm able to wear them instead of leave them in my apartment, which worked out really well
mm,
for me. Um,
mm-hmm,
a lot of times, a lot of these jobs, I had to work through a translator. And what that means is some person you don't know very well is interpreting what you're saying. So whenever I would go in, I would talk to my translator. I'd say, if I say anything rude or if I say anything that's inappropriate, help me out with that. I mean, I didn't come halfway around the world to insult somebody. So please make sure that's never a problem. But there were a couple of times where I did want to make a point and did want to be a little insulting. And I'd have to say the translator exactly as I said it. And they're like, no. I'm like, yes. And tell them I said it.
oh my goodness.
And the looks across the table was like gasps. But sometimes you've got to like pull somebody over that finish line in a tough way. So that's like
Mm-hmm.
translated, but you really do depend on your translators. Oh my gosh, they do everything for you. You're at their mercy, so you have to treat them very, very well.
Oh yeah, that's an
Mhm.
excellent point.
Yeah. You kind of bring up a good point too of, you're talking to your translator, tell me if I'm saying something offensive or rude. So, did you find that there was a lot of cultural differences that you had a hard time adjusting to, or how was your experiences with the different cultures?
Well, we're not a polite culture. We're a friendly culture, but we're not. I mean, except in the South, where they're lovely, lovely people. I'm from California, and we're just not that way. And I had to learn that when someone was saying yes, it didn't necessarily mean they were saying yes. They were like being polite. Of course, we will do that. Absolute, we're fully on board. And then, of course, that wasn't the situation at all. So, polite
Mm-hmm.
societies is something that you have to get used to quickly. Um, I make a point of studying up on the country before I go. It's last minute, and I get I get newspaper articles. At least I know something about the country, because these countries have so much history that we forget. I mean, what do we have? 275 years, more or less. These other countries have been around for years. I mean, thousands of years. So you have to go back pretty far sometimes to realize why this country doesn't like this country, or where there might be issues. So, but
Mm-hmm.
that is kind of the interesting part. And I tried to present that in the book. because when I did, my first draft, I made all my friends review it because it was COVID and nobody was doing anything. So I figured they could help me out. I mean, I was helping them out from not being bored. And they would say, why were you even there? Why is the US even there? Which is an issue that comes up all the time, even in
Mhm.
today's news. And so I went through and I explained, why this country the way it was and why the US was trying to help out. And there were different reasons for different countries. So people seem to like that part.
Yeah, and I think the fact that you're looking into the history too, like the past informs so much of what the present is and what the future can be sometimes, of like where did it come from and how did it get to be the way that it is, to kind of even just have that backstory, that context, so that like we're not approaching it with like a kind of accusatory finger. Like the story first. So I think that's incredible that you go through and make a point of like learning that history, that rich history that you're right, we just don't have that much compared to other countries. So
But
that's really
the difference
incredible.
is, I'm from California and I'm from San Jose, California, and nothing, history was the gold rush to me. I mean, and that
Mm.
was in
Mhm.
what, 1849? It's like, oh my gosh, and that was so long ago. And then you go to these other countries and the ministries are in buildings that are 400 years old. And you're like, oh wow, that's just so hard to get your head wrapped around, that these civilizations were so old. But I would hear on
Mhm.
and on when we talk about corruption, because corruption is a big problem in a lot of these countries. And they would school me and they would say, it's only because your society is so young. When you're as old as we are, you will have the same problems with corruption. I also got a lot of empire um, comments, is that sense that the United States is this generation's empire and that other empires in the past have crumbled and it would be our turn soon enough. So it's sort of a doomsday. I always blew them off. I'm
Mm.
like, ha, I would say.
And here we are now. Kind of crumbling, but that's okay.
You know what? I think about that frequently. I do. I do.
And now a quick word from our sponsor. Newsly is an all-in-one audio super app for iOS and Android. It picks up the most trending articles on the web on topics you choose at any given moment and reads them to you in a natural human voice. The entire web becomes listenable for the first time, all in one place. Browse articles from topics you choose and start playing. Stop scrolling and start listening. You can follow any topic as specific as you like, from sports, tech, business, science, Bitcoin, or even the Kardashians. It will find you the latest articles and read them to you aloud. And the best part, they have podcasts. Explore trending podcasts from over 80 countries. You can even find us there. I started using it as my default podcast app. They even have a digital radio. Download and use Newsly for free now at www.newsly.me or from the link in the description, and use promo code WIVES. That's WIVES. And you can get a 1-month free premium subscription. You can find all this information in our description from this episode. And now back to our episode.
But for the most part, I didn't work for the US government. I worked for a contractor who hired people to work on projects. So, unlike people who work for the State Department or USID, I was free to roam around town. I didn't have to comply with the rules and regulations. I mean, I wasn't in bulletproof cars, I didn't have any security detail unless I was in Afghanistan, and then later Iraq. But it was so I was free to roam around, and I had a boyfriend on many of these projects, the same guy, and I would try and meet up in these various countries, and we would walk around town completely unafraid, although we should have been. And that's where the name of the book comes from. He talked me into taking a bike ride, riding a bicycle in Kabul on a Friday when all the Muslims are either at home preparing to go to the mosque in the afternoon. So the streets were deserted. There weren't even dogs or cats on the streets. And so we borrowed two bikes and we rode down the street, and we could have easily been picked up by the Taliban. It was just insanity, but that was Roberto's way. Nothing worried him. He had no fear. And so we drove down the street and we went around the empty marketplace, and then he just disappeared. And I was by myself on a bike in downtown Kabul, and I didn't have anybody to call. I didn't have any backup. It wasn't on a project that would come. And I was just furious because he appeared, he had just taken a different route. That's
Oh
where that
no.
story comes from. Just one of my many adventures.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask the question of like, where does that come from? So thank you for answering that. That's like, wow.
It was ridiculous in every way. And then he came up and he said to me, I was furious. I'm like, Richard, I mean, it's like, Roberto, I was so worried about you. He goes, you know, you need to be a little more adventurous. And I'm like, I'm a Western woman riding a bike in downtown Kabul at 7 in the morning. How much more adventurous can I be? And I let my
Right.
bike roll down into the swampy river to teach him a lesson. It was just like,
Mic
how
drop.
can I be more adventurous?
My goodness. Yeah, what was that like? Like that's a little bit of a glimpse into like being in some of these war torn or like some of these like a little bit scarier from a Western perspective countries. What was that like for you?
I think though, as a lawyer working in a ministry or working on a project, I meet the best of the best, right? There is one story about when I was in Bangladesh, and I was at the end of the project, and I took a tour with a group of French tourists to a remote city, and as we walked through this very small village, somebody yelled out, "Where are you from?" And the French tourist said, "We are French." And then somebody says, "But we have one American." And immediately, this very rural village, and this was after 9/11, so Bangladesh had become kind of radicalized, at least for a few years. They started looking for me in the queue of tourists. Are you the American? Are you the American? Are you the American? And they came back, they found me at the end, and they pushed the guards aside and they grabbed me, and they had held my backpack, and I'm like, I didn't even know what could possibly happen. I just felt so doomed. And then out of the nowhere, there was a man sitting on a low chair with a baseball cap on, and he goes, "Where'd you go to school?" And I was like shaking. And I went to Berkeley, and he goes, "I spent some time in Nebraska on an exchange program." And it was like the crowd is looking at me, then looking at him, then looking at me for my response. And he goes, "Leave her alone." And they did. They let go of me. They pushed me forward. I stumbled. The guards got up. They picked me up. They rushed me to the place where we were staying, and they put me in a different room with bars on the window, and they locked me in so no one could get to me. And that's how it was for that night. And then I went back to the boat, and they kept a guard on me while the French tourists were, bought bought handicrafts in the market. And meanwhile, I'm sitting in the boat, pretty unhappy with my situation. But the point of that story is, I didn't do anything right. I didn't tell the embassy I was there. I didn't tell my hotel that I was taking this trip. My cell phone didn't work. Nobody knew where I was. So the point that I was trying to make was, even if you think you know what you're doing, you have to be aware of your surroundings. You have to take care of your own security, because you're the only person who's going to do it in some cases.
Yeah. Wow. I'm just so glad that that turned out how it did and
You know
that there
what?
wasn't a different ending to that story.
I could not tell that story for years without getting choked up. That
Mm,
is how upset I was after that drama. It was just, it shook me up for a long
hmm.
time. I wouldn't want
I'm so
anybody to go
sorry
through
that
that.
happened. Woof.
Me too.
Whew. Yeah. But it's, I mean, it's incredible work that you do. Like what you do overseas is it's honestly it's fascinating to me, and I want to learn so much more about it. But then also it's just like important work and clearly a passion of yours. And then for something like this to kind of come in the middle of it, I'd imagine that's not easy to kind of grapple with. Yeah.
It was, but you know what? I want to say one thing about Bangladesh. It's a fascinating country. It's beautiful. The people are generous and lovely. That was just one episode that could have happened in so many other countries. So,
Totally.
not and Bangladesh is one of those countries that is really improving. They're doing all kinds of things. Their economy is getting better. Standard of living is getting better. So, I hate the thought that that's a reflection on Bangladesh, because
Mm.
it's really in an exotic country.
Can't hold the actions of one person to the entire country.
But
Absolutely not.
this is a good circle
Yeah.
back. When I went to Bangladesh, the only thing I could find to help me get prepared was a guidebook. And the guidebook was prepared before 9/11. So it made no
Mm.
mention of how there was this new fundamentalist movement. And if I had read something more recent, I would have been more aware of it. So there you
Mm.
are.
That's so interesting. Oh my gosh. So I mean, yeah, that's that, and I'm glad that that kind of had like a almost a teaching moment a little bit. Not that that was like entirely your fault, but like the things that you learned from it, like anything that's a negative experience and learning from it, then too. And I'm interested to like what has made you most proud or excited in this work, or like has there been a location that's excited you the most, or where do you find that sense?
I will say one thing. I'm always amazed at the remarkably intelligent people I meet who really haven't had an international experience. Like, one of the most amazing ministers I ever worked with was in southern Sudan, and he was educated in Khartoum. Okay, so that just shows you that it's not where you go to school necessarily. It's not necessarily where you came out of. There's a lot that goes into someone who's successful, and he was such a great experience because I never had to tell him anything. All he needed me there was to write the laws and write the policies. I mean, he knew exactly what he wanted and where he wanted to go. But then again, Southern Sudan is still very, very poor. It still has a
Mm.
long, long way to go. There's still a lot of tribal strife and ethnic strife. So even though they may have a very nice penal code, thanks to me, there's still so
Yes.
many other things that are wrong that need to be addressed. And that's painful,
Hmm.
to try and get one part done, but there's so many other things that need to be looked into.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Do you have plans to further your work?
I don't know. I'd love to. I miss it. After COVID, things kind of in my area, which is legal reform, all that money went to inoculations and food security, which makes a lot of sense. I
Mm.
mean, that's a really important area, and climate change. I mean, they're worried about helping these small island states. So there wasn't a lot of work, but there are more projects coming on. But you know what? I'm 65, and I don't feel 65, but I'm sort of a dinosaur in the industry. You can feel it
Mm.
when you interview for these jobs and they go, "So, if you were going to be late for work, would you call your supervisor?" And you're like, "What?" It's a whole different, it's a different industry now, and in some ways
Mhm.
I think, yeah, I got the best out of it, and I enjoyed it. I am working on the sequel. The first book did well enough, and that I'm working on a sequel, and those countries will be Iraq, Vietnam, East Timor, Armenia, Uzbekistan, and
Oh,
and but I have to write it now because I won't remember why those countries were so important and so interesting, 10 years down the
Mhm.
line. So I'm working on that now.
Oh, that's
That's so
exciting.
exciting. Yeah, congratulations. That's awesome.
If you
We'll be
had
on the
a
lookout.
Yeah. If you had to pick one place that you've been to in all of your travels, what has been your favorite or maybe the place that you've learned the most or has broke, stereotypes that we have here in the US? I know that was kind of a loaded question, but
Okay.
what do you
Well,
think?
just because of the way my projects lined up, probably my favorite place was Moscow because before that I had been in Micronesia, I'd been in Dhaka, I'd been, in very small, underdeveloped countries. Moscow's a city. Oh my God, that place! It's got history, it's got music, it's got ballet, it's just insane. It's like it's every much of a magnificent city as New York or London, but you kind of didn't expect that. I kind of expected to see like babushkas pulling carts with donkeys and stuff, but it's not. It's like remarkable. You go in and see Fabergé eggs, and they have the largest English silver collection in the world because during the Second World War they didn't melt it down like other countries
Mm.
did. So just because I'd been to kind of smaller places before, it was like, wow, this is the big city. And that was really fun. And the project was fun. I worked with really smart people. It wasn't successful, but it was interesting. Stereotypes, I mentioned the minister I worked in Southern Sudan prepared to have to lead this guy along. No, this guy was 100 miles ahead of me, and I had to work night and day to stay up with him. So that's probably the stereotype that was shattered for me.
Yeah, I've that's a big one. And one we haven't heard on our podcast. So thank you for bringing that perspective to us.
When I was in Southern Sudan, I lived in a tent. And
Mm.
so I didn't know that before I left. I mean, it's like, okay, you got accommodations, we'll pick you up, blah, blah, blah. And so when I got there, it was a tent, a recycled safari tent. And for those 18 months, I slept on a squeaky cot in a tent, which meant that you heard everybody walking back and forth. And so now people will say, "Hey, we're going camping. Are you going to come?" I'm like, "No, no." I've had
You've had enough.
that's it. It's like, "Oh, did you want to sit outside on the patio?" Nope. I'd like to be inside. So it's kind of ruined me for that nature
Oh.
stuff. It's kind of like,
Mm-hmm.
nope, no, 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 no. I did want to make one more mention that you had a guest who walked the El Camino. In the end of the book, I wrote walked the El Camino as well, and it was as spiritual as she explained. It really is. If anybody's out there having wondering if they should do it. Oh my gosh, it is such a lovely spiritual week. I only did the week one, but it's just a terrific thing to do.
That's awesome. Did you just kind of like decide? Is that something that you knew you wanted to do before you headed out there? Or is that something that like you were over there and you were like, oh, I think I'll do that?
No, I had a really tough time that second time in Afghanistan, and it just kind of broke me in a way because there was so much that went on that I didn't agree with, and I was just like, I need something to bring my spirit back. And you know how Facebook has those algorithms? All of a sudden, it's like an advertisement came up for the El Camino, and it's kind of like, well, thank you. It's like I'm looking up above. It's like that'll help. And yeah, so because of that, because of a random Facebook posting, I'm like, that's what I'm gonna do. I was meant to do it. And it did. It helped. It made me feel a lot better.
Wow, that is very
Yeah.
powerful.
You never know
It
where that itch
was.
to travel is going to come from.
It was. It was amazing. I just that's just being out there and the air was clean and you meet friendly people and you're all on the same path. It's really a nice experience.
That's awesome. Oh, we're forming our own little like Camino group here on the Wanderlusting Wives podcast. Ellie, we gotta get in on this.
Yes, we do.
Awesome. Well, Jamie, thank you so much for sharing your experiences and Honestly, it sounds like you've had a lot of experiences that might have been hard to talk about at first, and even you said a couple of them were hard. So we're just appreciative that you are willing to share this with us and our listeners, and generally just the world. So thanks for being a guest on our podcast.
Oh, it was my pleasure. It was really fun. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. And make sure you check out Jamie's book, Bike Riding Kabul, the Global Adventures of a Foreign Aid Practitioner. We'll be sure to leave the link to either Amazon or Barnes & Noble or whoever you want us to promote your book, Jamie. We will make sure we leave a link for our listeners to check that out. And stay tuned for her sequel that's coming out whenever she
Who
gets time to
knows?
write it. Yeah, whenever she gets time to write it. Make sure you tune back, right? Tune back in.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jamie.
Thanks again.
Thanks for tuning in to the Wanderlusting Wives podcast. Come escape with us again every other Tuesday for Travel Tuesdays and every other Wednesday for Wildcard Wednesdays.
Don't forget to give us a subscribe and a follow on all of our social media and wherever you listen to your podcasts. And until next time, wander on.